Bonjour à toutes et tous, vous écoutez First Print, votre podcast comics préféré pour une nouvelle émission du format Super Friends. C'est dans cette émission que l'on va à la rencontre des personnes qui font vivre la pop culture et la culture comics par leur travail au quotidien. Dans la foulée du Festival d'Angoulême, on a encore quelques rendez-vous à prendre et aujourd'hui on va retrouver dans cette émission Richard Blake qui a publié chez Urban Comics Horizons Obliques, soit le titre français... le titre français de Hexagon Bridge. Donc, l'auteur était invité au cœur du FIBD. On se retrouve là chez Mommy BD qui a eu la gentillesse de nous accueillir pour conduire cette interview qui sera intégralement en anglais. On se retrouve donc juste après le lancement du générique pour parler avec Richard. So it's really nice to have you here on our podcast, Richard Blake.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
How do you like France? It's not the first time you've been in France, but it was maybe the first time as a comic book artist and writer. So how did it feel?
Oh, I love it. I mean, it's this is my third time being here. I was in only as a visitor in Angoulême 2015, and but I came here primarily for the BD culture and. That out of that came just a love of French language, French culture, and obviously the country and Paris itself and the city and the buildings. And so I love it very much. So I'm always happy to come back. And I've often considered moving here, you know, if the opportunity arises.
Why didn't you do that? Why didn't you move?
Well, I'm still thinking of doing it. Okay. I don't know that I'll move to Paris, but maybe.
Because where are you living right now?
New York.
Yeah, you should definitely go to France.
Yeah.
we have our own fascists, but they're only going to rise like in 3 years. So you have 3 years period. Yeah. Sorry. So okay, let's talk about comics. It's better.
Okay.
But so it's the first time we speak together, and actually you're not from a comics background at the beginning, at least. Right. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you grew up, with which comics you were reading, and at what time you also decided that you wanted to be an artist?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, I mean, like a lot of comic artists, a lot of artists, I mean, I was drawing from a really young age. And a lot of the early books that I came across were in the States, we have these kind of compilations of Sunday funnies. But I was always reading Sunday comic strips like The Far Side and Garfield and all that. And I would often take inspiration from those early cartoons. But then at some point I discovered comics, and I was just really fascinated by the fact that you could tell a story in drawings in that manner. And but my father was a painter, and so naturally there were also other art books around in the house. And so I became very interested in just art in general and fine art. And he also had graphic design books in the house, so I was always looking at those as well. And so I had this whole sort of, various examples of art practices to be into. So I was just trying out, testing out everything. And up until about, when I was around 15 or so, I thought I might go into comics. It was something that really interested me. But
do you know why? Why comics? Because there are several kinds of picture arts, like you said, painting or so, and comics. Do you know what maybe comics attracted you more?
I think it was just the storytelling, you know, initially, and then I also at that age I discovered heavy metal, and I discovered the translations of the French BD, and that's when I first saw Bilal and Squitten and Mobius, and prior to that I had only ever seen Marvel comics and DC comics and stuff, which after I saw the BD stuff, I was really excited by that. And but then
not so much anymore about the superheroes comic book.
Not so much anymore, you know. Okay. But I think you know, I wasn't at the time. I thought, well, I'm not European. I don't really know how I would draw those kinds of comics. And I guess I could have just drawn them anyway. But it seemed to me like if I wanted to be a comic artist, I would have to go at that time through the Marvel system and and at least for a certain period of time, draw those kinds of characters and stuff. And so I didn't really know what I was going to do. And so I think I just drifted towards fine art, you know, and ended up going to school for that and studied fine art, studied painting, and then got really immersed in that. And then did all that all the way through graduate school, started showing in New York. And then I became very kind of dissatisfied with that in various ways. And I thought film might be an option, but I tried that for a while. But that didn't really go in the direction that I wanted. And so I eventually I rediscovered comics. And I thought this might be, maybe this is the time. Maybe I'm ready to do this.
How did you notice that between the first time that you were into comics and when you rediscovered comics, the field had evolved a lot, especially with all the indie publishers and all the artists that have emerged since the first time?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I started looking at comics in the 80s, so there was a kind of very small indie scene at the time, and there were people self-publishing at the time. But by the time I had gotten interested, I mean, Image had already gone through all the various eras and had gotten to the point where it was really, as it is now, which is kind of more like a European publisher within the US because they do so many different things. So Image was around, Dark Horse, Boom. I mean, all those companies had really evolved by the time I had decided to begin making comics. And so it was, it just seemed like a very exciting time and to be making books.
So how do you present a new project in this industry? Is it hard since you hadn't done any comics before?
Yeah.
How do you start a new?
I still don't know because I never showed my. As soon as I decided to start making comics, I treated it very much like painting. I came up with the idea for Horizons Obliques and our Hexagon bridge, and I just started making it. I had no idea who I was going to show it to or where, you know.
So you didn't have like, the many artists have the standard story of I was at conventions showing my portfolios and then an editor contacted me. So that's not your story.
No.
Okay.
No, I never, I did that very early on. I showed a DC editor some work, but I wouldn't do it sort of with the idea that it wasn't that I wanted to get a job at DC. I just wanted his opinion because I knew I kind of respected his work as an artist. And, and he gave me some good advice, but then I just went back to my drawing. That was only once. But other than that, I had no idea how to break in or how to go about showing people my work, especially because I wasn't trying to work for the companies. It was very organic how I eventually got in. But yeah.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit how?
Yeah. So there was a grant called Creators for Creators that different artists and writers had put together for someone sort of emerging. So you would submit your work, and if you got in, you got the grant, and you got sort of mentorship into the industry. And so I applied for this grant with the book, and I didn't end up getting the grant, but Jonathan Hickman was on the jury.
Okay.
Yeah, and he saw my work, and he emailed me. I think right after the winners and all that were announced, and he said, I saw your work. I really loved it. And I'd like to help you get it published. So we talked, and he sent it over to Image, and Eric Stevenson at Image contacted me, and he said, yeah, I love it. And let's go. And so that was it.
So yeah. You told us that you didn't have any specific company in mind when you wanted to publish your book. And when we look at the French, and especially when we look at the French version, we almost see like a book that was aimed for the European or French market.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you ever had the idea of submitting it directly to a French publisher or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had thought of that, but then again, I didn't know anybody really, and I didn't know where to send it to or who to show it to. I mean, there were a few loose leads here and there, but I didn't know. exactly how I would go about doing that. So it was very much a mystery to me how anything worked.
But now you know. I hope you made contacts.
Now I know
during Angoulême, so you don't have to go through an American publisher.
Yeah, no, now I know. Now it's very clear to me where to go.
All right, tell us a little bit more about the origins of Hexagon Bridge. Mm-hmm. What was the spark, the initial spark?
Well, again, much like painting, most of the work that I do, it just starts off with a series of images and sequences that I have in that keep sort of playing out in my mind. And then I'll start putting those, well, for this book in particular, I start putting those down on paper and doing some storyboards and then doing some final pages. And then I start to construct a story from the sequence. And I'll do kind of maybe a brief outline or something. But mostly, particularly with this book, I approached it more intuitively, and which presented its own challenges. But I knew I didn't really want it to be like a screenplay or a television script or something with all those beats, you know, where you have like a central conflict and you've got an antagonist, a clear antagonist, and a protagonist, and something that they want, and something that they're trying to get, something that's blocking them. And I wanted it to be more like a vibe or a mood or a series of images, like more like poetry, I guess. And but I mean, for the next book, it's very structured and has a very, in some ways, a traditional story structure. But so this started out as just me drawing a lot of pages, and then I would work on it and finish certain sections of it, and then figure out where I might go and where I might be, and then I just would start again, and characters would present themselves, and I would start including them, and then they would sort of inform what's going on in the story, and eventually it started to just sort of become clearer what the narrative was. And it's like laying down track as a train is approaching.
So you're really saying that, the images like were driving the project and not necessarily a story nor protagonist.
No.
So you just have to, it's a really unconventional way of doing comics.
Yeah. I mean, and it can be very, and I realize that there are some readers that aren't going to respond to that. You know, they're going to find that it's too open, you know, or there isn't enough conflict. Or there isn't a clear protagonist. I mean, eventually, I think there is one, and Adley, the character. But at least for me, it just kept it really exciting as a project, and it kept it very open. And there were things I could include, and I didn't have to sort of rationalize it. And I wanted to try something a little different. So.
What are these images that you wanted to show, like all the places which seems to be floating around because they're in a parallel dimensions? Was it something that you imagined and you would just like try a way to connect them through the story? Is that how it came?
Yeah, well, when it came to actually building, I knew I was at a certain point. I knew there was going to be another dimension, and that there was going to have to be a certain kind of aesthetic to it, but much like the whole story itself, the design of the other dimension came about in a very painterly way. Because I felt like, you know, the more I tried to contrive it and try to over design it, the more it would just look like so many other things I've already seen, you know, than in video games or movies or whatever. So I just gathered a bunch of different philosophies about how the dimension worked. And for example, that it was just built up of different memories from different eras, from different people who've been in that actual dimension. So you have different objects like the Citroen, the old Citroen, or you have different pieces of architecture that are modernist, and then you have some that are from that are more classical or more brutalist or more, you know, more ancient. And all these things are colliding together and forming these different hybrid environments, like little islands that will break apart and disappear and are unstable, And also, as you move to more towards the nucleus of the dimension, things become more sparse and it becomes more empty. Because I had seen all these sort of, these examples of these like mega cities and things. I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to be.
It could be more tiring also to draw.
Well, yeah. I mean, I knew I could do that, but I felt like it would be more interesting if it was just more empty. Actually, there was a kind of. And as you notice, as you go into the story, as they go further into the story, it just becomes more emptied of architecture.
And you also really like to use negative space in that way.
Exactly.
Like showing stuff by not showing
exactly.
stuff.
Yeah. And it allowed for some really precise compositions within the frames. And it just seemed more, I mean, I've seen so many people who do these, very complex, dense environments with just, buildings that go everywhere and arcs and things. And I knew I could have done that, but there are people who do that so well already, but I hadn't seen something that was more minimal. And that probably comes from my father, who was a minimalist painter, and looking at those painters and wanted to play with that form, those kind of forms.
And there's also when I was preparing this interview, I read the postface in which you already have an interview with Squeaton, and I was like, well, he already asked all the questions. What more could be said?
Yeah.
But I'm also interested that you're mentioning that throughout the process, you went from traditional drawing to digital.
Yeah.
What was necessary to go through to digital techniques?
There were just for example, there were just some elements that were just way too complex to do traditionally. Like a lot of the maps in the book were so dense. Like if there was anything that was going to be dense, it was going to be the maps and that they navigate through, that they use to navigate. But then I also wanted a certain kind of light and energy, particularly when they're crossing over, or when Staden crosses over into the dimension. There was I didn't want it to be like a drawn light. I wanted it to be very much like a light that has a certain charge to it, like a certain energy, and that could only be achieved through the digital layers. So that was one thing. But also, I think, and whether this is conscious or unconscious, I wanted by the time they got to the other dimension, I wanted it to feel just different. So the first half of the book is very much traditional. The last half is digital. And so it just starts to feel, there just has a different quality to it. And then probably lastly is just that it was faster. And I needed to finich the book.
You could just say that in the beginning. It was faster. I'm lazy.
It was faster. Yeah.
No, but it's always like amusing because you have to find also sometimes some techniques just not to take too much time on a single panel or on a single page, because otherwise I don't know if you had deadlines or if you started the project with everything completely finished or not.
Well, the image lets you sort of set your own deadline. That they let you let them know when you think however much time you need. But there came a certain point where it's like I had to set a deadline, especially when you start soliciting the book. Then you have a deadline. Then you have print dates. And even though I could have gone on, I'd probably still be drawing it if I didn't have that, because I could just go on forever. And so I think it's important to stop.
And also, speaking of the unconventional structure, when we read the French edition, there's no chapter break. So I was also wondering if when you assembled all the elements to do your story, you had also had to think about the pacing and the rhythm of the story so that it could be published in 22 or 30 page chapters in the United States. But it doesn't seem to have been thought for a 30-page chapter story, if you know what I mean.
Right. Well, the chapter breaks really just about. That was also very intuitive. It's just like I felt that sometimes the chapter, like they don't always end in the same amount of pages. They just end when I feel like there just needs to be a break in the story. It's not necessarily prescribed.
Yeah, because you didn't do like a cliffhangers or stuff like that.
No.
In a repetitive way.
No.
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 But it might be dangerous to do like that, because you also know that when you're in a single issue market, you have also to keep the readers entertaining.
Yeah, I learned about that. Yeah, yeah. There were some. Yeah, I think probably some readers of the single issues felt like there wasn't enough, or it didn't end on enough of a cliffhanger to grab them to want to pick up the next thing. And some people found things intriguing anyway, and but yeah, that was as a first time book, I might do things differently next time.
So we'll speak about that next book just after, but I still have a few questions about Hexagon Bridge. I noticed also something that, but I don't know if it was intentional or not, that in the first chapter, I forgot the name of the character now. Adley. Yeah, but not Aldi. Yeah. Adley. She's speaking about a dream that she have with a bear on her back, and then it's the cover of the second issue. I don't know if it was just like a nod or like a gift for the readers that would still buy the new issues, to have like, hey, you read that in the first issue.
Yeah.
And, it's here is what it's like. I don't know how it was, like some kind of play with the readers.
It was, yeah. Because I had come up with that image. I knew that I wanted her to have a dream, and that she describes in the story. But in the actual comic, I didn't want to represent that, so I put it on the cover, almost as though it would make this impression. And so when you're reading it and she's describing it, the reader, kind of has this image in their head, much in the way that she's describing it in her mind. Like she's trying to remember it. And then, you go back and you can look at it, but it's kind of floating around in your mind as an image. And I had never seen a dream illustrated on a cover that's described later as a dream. Usually it's just what happens in the book.
Yeah, it's like a meta narrative or something like that.
Yeah. So it was just to me it sums up the whole book. That's her task and the struggle that she's sort of embarking on in terms of finding her parents and stuff. So it sums it up in a way, but even though you don't actually see it in the comic.
So the two parents of Alia are cartographers. Do you think this is an important stuff? Because back in centuries before, they were like very, very important. So when we had to discover the world, and so do you feel like this is something that we should still have, because there are still even lands on Earth that we didn't know about, and maybe to explore the cyberspace or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I mean, I think obviously the world that we live in, I mean, the Earth is so mapped, maybe overly so, I think there's something about what I miss about even though I like GPS systems and being able to maneuver the city very easily, I miss being lost, and having to pull out a piece of paper and wonder where you're at and everything. Cause it's often you find new things by being lost, It's something I used to do all the time when I was living in Europe as a student. I would just go to a city and that I didn't know where it was, and I would just get lost and find my way back, and I would discover a lot of things. So I think if we went into a new dimension, I think that isn't mapped that in the way that our Earth is, our Earth landscape, we could re-experience that again, like the early cartographers, and discover new things. Yeah, it's something you should have tried in Angoulême. You just arrive at Angoulême, without a map, without anything, and you just try to find new things. Yeah, I guess I could just turn my GPS off and just. But the thing is, you always know you can get out of it, And there were times when I was scared, because I didn't know. You have to ask people where you are and stuff, and having grown up at a time when there wasn't iPhones and Google Maps and these kinds of things, I remember how difficult it could be to navigate around.
So there's also characters that are AI characters. are you fascinated by the possibility that we have such an advanced technology that we could create sentient beings out of just plastic?
Yeah. To an extent. I mean, it isn't like a primary concern of mine. I mean, I think at the time that I started the book, those discussions were just beginning to happen about AI because it was still very much developing in its early kind of forms. It's just really a coincidence that the book came out at a time when that debate is very hot and very active, and people are talking about that.
But I'm not speaking about generating images through AI.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
really speaking about the technology that you're showing in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I was curious about how a consciousness could be uploaded into something like a robotic being. You know, I had read The Singularity, the Kurzweil book on that idea, and that was something that was really interesting to me. And in some ways, that's what Adley has done with Staden, I feel. You know, that whole sort of marrying of their consciousness is her uploading her spirit, so to speak, within Staden. And I think he's just a mirror of her. And if you sort of read the book in that way, you sort of see that, you know, she really doesn't stay put in the map. That's just one part of her. She's actually split into two different beings. So yeah, that specific idea was interesting to me in regards to AI.
I also wanted to know, like a bit, because the character, like you said, there's no like a real antagonist. There's no like a goal for the character. It's just like we see some sort of I wouldn't say a slice of life, but like this is just a part of the journey of someone's, but we won't see where it's coming to, because in the end she's maybe just gonna create or explore other dimensions or other worlds. What did the I would say like the goal also of the story, like you want just people to invite also to create or explore in their own lives?
Yeah, I think that was some of it. I mean, I think also the idea for me is that it doesn't end, that there's going to be another book, and there's going to be a whole other series of books based on different characters within that world, and that it's a world that can keep growing. But
it's just an idea. You're not doing sequels or follow-ups or spin-offs.
I am, yeah.
Oh, yes, you are. Okay.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Right.
It was hard, you know, being my first book. I would have put volume 1 or tome 1 on the book.
Not a good idea.
No, that's not a good.
Not in this market.
No, really.
Right now, no, people are not less into series or ongoing series. So maybe it's a smart thing maybe to not just put a volume 1 and let people discover afterward that there's a sequel or a spin-off.
That's good then.
So maybe you were really smart without knowing it.
Yeah. No. I had always planned there to be more.
Okay.
You know? But I had no idea. Again, I didn't think anybody would
read it.
Yeah, I thought maybe the single issues would come out and that would be it. I didn't think it would be in a trade. I didn't think it would go to France. I didn't think it would go to all the other countries it's gone to.
But thinking about it, it seems logical right now, because especially when you have got a universe when you can go throughout realities and explore different dimensions. It's quite logical to have different books, explore different worlds with different characters.
Yeah, and so you'll see Adley again. You'll see the other characters like Martin Dutoit, the photographer robot. You'll see the koala again. You'll see Staden and what he's doing. And the idea is to continue that world, not just in books, but also in paintings and art books. And so that eventually you have a whole world that's described in many different formats, you know, landscape format books. And that has a kind of logical coherence once it's all sort of together.
So it seems you also want to explore all the possibilities that you can have with just a single page. What comic books are offering in terms of also not only in structure, but also in terms of format or size of pages.
Exactly. Yeah. Like the next book I have planned, I want to do in a landscape format. Okay. And I want to push it even farther in terms of experimental, playing with the text and graphic design and
Are you looking for what Chris Ware or some artists like that are
yeah,
doing
things
also,
like that. Yeah, probably more leaning towards that kind of playful structure and really exploring the formal elements of comic making. Yeah.
But was it harder because you weren't from, like we said at the beginning, that you were a painter before, you were doing illustrations, to go through comics is also to have to master the storytelling.
Yeah.
Was it a hard transition to tell a story through images, through not just one image?
Yeah.
I mean.
Well, it isn't with this project because it just feels so much like painting. I think the project that's parallel to this, the next book, I actually went back and studied a lot of those writing structures, because I feel like I would like to tell a story that's more formal, and I would like to explore something a little bit more traditional. So that was actually difficult a little bit, trying to figure out because there's so many different approaches you can take, and there's so many different philosophies. You know, there's the hero's journey, there's, the 3-act structure, there's 4-act structure, all these kinds of things. And you have to really figure out which one works for you and which one you feel most attuned to. So I spent most of last year just diving into all that.
When you're reading other comics, you're just
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
trying to analyze a little bit.
Yeah, try to do that a little bit more. Yeah. So the next project that I'm doing right after this, which is not I'm doing something that's related to Horizons Obliques, but then the bigger project is it has all those things you think of in traditional storytelling. It has a main character that's a clear protagonist, antagonist, and all these kinds of different elements that.
So you're just saying to yourself, can I do a more classical stuff?
Yeah, it's a little bit
but
like
maybe it's challenging for you because you're used to do experimental stuff, and now you're just trying to be mainstream.
Yeah. It's just like it's sort of like when George Lucas did a THX 1138, and it was very experimental and crazy, and then he challenged himself to do American Graffiti, which was a little bit more traditional. But then eventually, of course, he did the hero's journey and all that. But it's a challenge for me, and I like that. I think it'd be interesting.
Is there some kind of recipe to because there are several silent sequences in Hexagon Bridge. How do you know when a silent sequence is working? Because you got when you're a reader and then there's no text, you can just flip through shows. So how do you make it? Because your challenge as an artist is also to catch the eye of the reader. So do you have not a recipe, but
like a formula?
Yeah.
No formula. I think it's just when it feels right. It's like, it seems to be like. I need a silence here, or I need a long sequence, or this just needs to breathe in a certain way. It's just kind of like when you're playing music, you need a certain note to contrast something else, or you want a certain movement to create a certain mood or tone. And often that's just intuitive. It just presents itself. You're working on the book, and it's like, oh, okay, I think. It just needs this right now. It just needs a certain kind of ingredient at this point. But I don't ever really know when that is. It just becomes clear.
It's not self-conscious. You're just doing it, and it was. But still, you have to. You have to choose the angles. You're like a director. So I don't know if there's a storyboard before that on which you're really working on to see what's the perfect angle for this partner and this one.
Yeah, I do that, but sometimes you have that, and you have something that's laid out, but then you wake up one night and you're like,
because you mentioned, I think in the interview, that you threw a lot of pages or so, that you redid quite some pages.
I redid some of the pages in the early on. I redid like 3 or 4 times because I would work on it, and then because it took so long, it took like 3 or 4 years. By the time I got to the most recent pages, I just had looked at the old pages and I thought this could be better, And I would see the mistakes in it, and even though you're supposed to leave things alone and just accept it,
you have to let go at some point.
You have to let go. Yeah. But I'm glad I redid some of them. I just because they turned out better, and it wasn't excessive or anything. It was just fixing, little things that I think if you saw some of the early pages, you'd be like, oh yeah, it's much better. It's good that you went back.
So you said that you were working already on 2 other projects. Mm-hmm. So I guess we won't have to see we won't have to wait 3 years to see them published.
I hope not. No, I'm finding ways to work faster. I think because this was my first book, I was learning so much, about how I want to approach books, and I was even just basic things like digital tools and inks and how all that comes together. And then even when I went to Image, how pre-press works and how when a book gets released and marketing and all those was all very new to me. Now that I kind of know the system a little bit more and how I want to make things, I think it could go faster,
So you told us that there's a spin-off or sequel from Hexagon Bridge in a landscape format. Yeah. And there's also the mainstream book. Let's call it the mainstream book. Yeah. And the mainstream book is separated from
Hexagon totally Bridge. Separate. Okay. Totally.
Can you tell us about this?
I can tell you. It's all I'll say. It's science fiction.
It's still science fiction.
Yeah, and it begins in the early 1960s, and it involves pickpockets. That's all I'll say.
And that's it. Yeah. That's it. But you're still doing science fiction. So I guess there's something really special about this genre that you like.
There is. Yeah. I think it's just the potential for, even though I'm dealing with a let's say a traditional script, that doesn't mean at some point it's going to just fall off and become completely abstract. But with sci-fi, I think you can find a way it's like a vessel for that abstraction, because it's just all speculation. So it suits me because I can find a way to make abstraction coherent. I would say.
All right. Well, we'll be looking forward to these next projects.
Thank you.
If we don't have to wait too long for them, of course.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Richard.
Thank you so much.